All
This
right,
is
it's 105. Are we good to kick it off?
yeah. Let's roll.
All right, you're freezing a little bit, Dr. James, but hopefully we're all good. So, want to say good Tuesday afternoon to everyone. Welcome to you. Must say congratulations on completing this 2021-2022 academic school year, which I've heard from educator friends across the country has certainly been one of the most challenging school years. So I would be remiss to not say one, congrats, but then also to thank you for who you are and what you are to our students. And I hope that this summer is very rejuvenating for you. And thank you for even choosing to be here today. That's a big reflection of you, your heart for this work. So thank you so much. And we're really excited to kick it off today. So, welcome to our live lesson demonstration entitled hashtag We Got Madison. With us today, we have the Morgan Craven, the Marlon James, and I am Kelly the Ferguson. I'll pass it to Morgan to introduce herself first, and we'll keep it going.
Thanks so much, Kelly. And I just want to reiterate the gratefulness that I feel for all of the work that you all do and for being here today. I am Morgan Craven. I'm the National Director of Policy Advocacy and Community Engagement at IDRA. So I lead our federal policy work and work with our policy advocacy and community engagement staff to think about the ways that what we see and experience in schools can translate into advocacy opportunities for young people and families and community-based organizations, and how we make sure that we are uplifting the experiences of students in schools, particularly in the U.S. South, to state and federal policymakers. I am going to be answering policy questions as they pop up in the chat and chiming in with my policy knowledge along the way. And thank you again, all of you, for being here. Am I passing it back to you, Kelly?
Yes, thank you so much. So such an honor to have you with us today. I am Dr. Kelly Ferguson. I am an educator through and through. I was a classroom teacher for 10 years, taught grades 2 through 5, thoroughly loved it. Transitioned to academia, was a professor in the teacher preparation program at Loyola University of Chicago. And then following 2020, we, Dr. James and I, created the Equality and Equity Group that you should see on the slide there. And essentially that was birthed following the death of George Floyd for us with a prompting to provide equity solutions for educational organizations concerned with promoting fairness, equal treatment, healthy professional work environments. And I'll pass it to Dr. James to introduce himself and then to set the tone for our presentation today.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, we want to echo my colleagues. Thank you all for your service to the country. We greatly appreciate that. Marlon James, I'm a professor at Texas A&M University, specializing in urban and multicultural education. My research deals with males of color and trying to bring out the best in these young people. And great, did I freeze? What is going on?
You're good. We can hear you.
Okay. So I'm very
Okay, now we can't hear you. Okay, he'll probably log off and then hop back in. But in the meantime, I'll just go ahead and hop in that means, can I advance? Yeah, I can advance. All right. So to set the tone for today, and actually let me go back here. Our focus on the hashtag We Got Madison, rethinking the Second Amendment. This is our lesson demo for today, but just understanding the sensitive nature of this topic, we just wanted to provide essentially a little context behind it and our rationale. So we certainly do acknowledge that gun violence is a serious issue, and that lessons such as this can bring up some emotions that we sometimes haven't processed, especially with many recent events. So we're all shaken by those tragedies in New York, in Texas, these past few weeks. Yet we're not helpless, nor are we hopeless. We believe that as educators, we can promote awareness and let our voices be heard through what we actually teach. So gun violence remains an issue where our society and leaders seem to have lost their moral courage. But today is about facing a problem and deciding to do what we can, even if it is imperfect and incomplete. We want to provide a couple of minutes for you to think and to share our thoughts on gun violence and mass shootings at a point throughout this lesson. So I'm going to advance to the next slide. And so our itinerary for today is as follows. So this lesson demo is designed to rethink both the protections and the limitations of the Second Amendment. We'll accomplish that by doing a couple of things. So one, exploring the very critical role that education has played in U.S. society. Secondly, presenting the America is Me framework, or the AIM framework, to explain how this curriculum development process can be used to teach for equity amongst censorship legislation. And then finally, presenting a concept that we've named intellectual freedoms, and there are three of them in particular, which are guiding principles for the America is Me framework. So if you take a look here, there's a statement at the very bottom. It says, our nation has turned to teachers in critical times to redress the most critical issues of the day. And you're going to see that tagline on the bottom of the next several slides. But the history of our nation in particular, the relationship between our economy, between families and schools, it has consistently changed. Before World War I, most education happened at home with families. But since then, the nation has moved to push families to work. Today, American workers clock more work hours than any other workers in the world. And to allow for this, schools have been asked to take up many of the roles that families used to have. And I'm sure that you feel that as well. More critically, our nation has turned to teachers in these critical times to redress the most critical issues of the day. So for instance, in the middle of World War I in 1916, to prepare more leaders for our military, you had the junior ROTC that was introduced into schools. 1920, to promote driver safety, what happened? Driver's ed was introduced. In 1922, we had Fire Prevention Week, which was established in response to the Great Chicago Fire, which caused over $200 million in damages, killed around 300 people, and destroyed over $17,000 worth of buildings and structures. 1946, what do we see? The National School Lunch Act, which provided low cost or free school lunches to qualified students. 1957, we got Sputnik, launched by Russia. In response, the U.S. introduced STEM education. 1968, we've got the war on poverty. Several research studies were conducted suggesting that poverty could be redressed through education, and Head Start was introduced in response. 1984, we had the Just Say No to Drugs campaign introduced to curb the increasing drug use among U.S. youth. 1985, we had sex ed introduced nationwide in response to the AIDS epidemic to decrease risk-taking behaviors, while conservatives promoted abstinence. And then we bring us to 2020, remote learning introduced so that parents could return to work amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. The list can go on ad infinitum, but the point is that truly our nation has a very long history of turning to teachers in very critical times, moments, to help redress the critical issues of the day. And that's a segue to then introduce this framework, America is Me.
Thank you, Dr. Ferguson. So, AIM is a framework that we designed to help teachers learn the different skills associated with equity pedagogy. In other words, our kids are often confused in society because they see, as adults, we try to tell them this is the right thing to do. We try to instill values in them. But then when they get online, they'll see adults who should, in leadership positions, who should be doing the right thing, but are not doing the right thing. I believe that causes some cognitive emotional confusion in individuals. And in part, it is on us as educators to try to figure out ways that we can support kids, because as Kelly presented, our society is no longer set up where parents are the primary providers for children. During the school year, that is teachers, that's educators, is schools. But our curriculum, in many cases, is not designed to link their lives with our lessons. So AIM is a resource designed to promote unity and equity in America by addressing the critical issues of our day through really great lesson planning. And throughout this lesson, we're going to unpack this for you. So we want you to think of this as a student, as you experience it now, but we also want you to think of it as an educator and how a lesson like this might be used in your own classroom.
So I'm going to just take a few quick minutes to give some context that I know all of you are probably familiar with and definitely felt during the school year. We know that for the past 2 years, state legislators throughout the nation have passed or proposed bills limiting what content can be taught in schools and how subjects like social studies and government and English and even math can be taught in K-12 public schools. And these bills have been intentionally vague. Rhetorically, they're framed as targeting critical race theory, but they're really targeting discussions of race and racial justice, the LGBTQ plus community, how history connects to the present, and the interconnected systems of oppression that are completely observable by students and that harm so many communities in this country. And these laws are really targeting culturally sustaining curriculum and approaches to teaching in favor of a Eurocentric education. So we're seeing these through book bans, through content and pedagogy bans, through these so-called CRT bans, through social emotional learning bans. They're showing up not just in state laws, but in the various interpretations at the campus and school district levels. And these so-called anti-CRT laws and these interpretations are being used to justify all sorts of restrictive measures that we're seeing on campuses and in school districts and communities, even some that are clearly not even covered in the law. So as of today, there are approximately 40 states that have proposed or passed legislation that restricts learning in the classroom, including nearly every single state in the US South, where all of you are from. So the important task then, and what we hope you'll understand at the end of this session, is how administrators and teachers can continue to teach in these culturally sustaining ways when they live in places with these laws and where there is this atmosphere of censorship and whitewashing of curriculum and of students' identities and experiences. And I'm happy to go into more detail and share resources about these policies. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I'll be checking the chat and answering any questions that you have while Dr. Ferguson and Dr. James present. There is one document in the handout section that I'll note. It is an explainer about the Texas policy, which is very similar to some of the other policies that have passed. So please feel free to use that. It's not meant to serve as legal advice at all. Nothing in this session is, but more an explanation of the policies that so that you all have the information and can determine how to use the framework that you're going to be learning today and other materials to continue to teach in culturally sustaining ways.
Thanks so much, Morgan. So we have this looming question here on your left. So how can we truly effectively teach the most diverse generation in U.S. history, given the constraints that Morgan just identified? And so here enters this America is Me framework, or AIM framework. Specifically, AIM provides educators with a number of things: curricular resources, specifically to examine, discuss, assess students' understanding of equity issues that are truly central to the development of U.S. history and contemporary society that Again, censorship legislation tries to essentially ban, but this is a framework. Again, it can't provide true protections, but it is a way to help prioritize important discussions that are central to U.S. society. So we do that specifically through the America is Me, or the AIM intercultural skills. So cultural diversity is something that I think we have come to understand, like we truly can no longer ignore that in the U.S. as we educate the most culturally, linguistically, economically, and religiously diverse generation of learners. So we have to do more to bring these social issues into the classroom, to provide students with opportunities to learn critical life skills and not solely academic content. It truly is about educating the whole child. So AIM addresses these concerns through these 5 intercultural skills, beginning with social emotional wellness, building this healthy sense of self as a primary curricular objective, through sociocultural exchange, where we're prioritizing students developing cultural tools that help to promote cross-cultural understandings. We have social change, which is a way to help students become engaged and act as agents in change. We have social awareness, which is promoting positive social change, which requires higher levels of personal awareness in terms of how our behaviors impact others. And then finally, we have solidarity. So this idea of trying to establish this path to solidarity and national unity in ways that our average curriculum just does not accomplish.
In addition to those intercultural skills, which I think are incredibly important in America today, we promote intellectual freedoms. We believe that there are 3 freedoms that every kid should have in every classroom in our country. These freedoms also correlate with some of the legislative issues that are facing schools today. And these intellectual freedoms, while they don't provide you a legal framework, what they do is give you a way of teaching that is student-centered. And being student-centered, for the most part, will allow you to continue to teach despite these legislations. So first is identity development. That is, we want every student to have an opportunity to develop a positive sense of individual and group identity. That is, in AIM lessons, you won't see any cultural group or any gender group or any religious group being put down, right? And so it takes time to get to that way of teaching, but identity development is absolutely critical. And every single study shows us that students' sense of identity is directly linked with their educational outcomes and behavioral outcomes. So it's important we promote this healthy sense of self. Information awareness is the second freedom we believe every kid should have. Because of all the information kids have at their fingertips, they are the most exposed generation in the world since humankind. They're clocking out to be the most intelligent. They're clocking out to be the wealthiest, but they also have a attention span of approximately 12 seconds. So they have to get information all the time, but sometimes they don't know how to sort through fact and fiction. And so the key with AIM lessons is we always use diverse sources and we always present multiple perspectives. That leads into the third freedom. We believe every kid in America, as we teach, should have the opportunity for intellectual discovery. That is, as an educator, we try to avoid imparting our own perspective. Rather, we want them to form their own thinking and be able to articulate their thinking and belief structures with the materials that we provide, right? And so we want them to be able to see different issues from different perspectives using different sources, all designed to help them learn to love themselves and learn to love their country folk.
All right, so here we go. We developed this upcoming lesson on the Second Amendment to demonstrate how the AIM framework, the America is Me framework, can help you to meet lesson objectives while exploring very critical social issues that are impacting the lives of your students. So this lesson still promotes intercultural skills that we talked about and centers on the intellectual freedoms of students. So the lesson, hashtag We Got Madison, is in reference to John Madison, who introduced the Second Amendment to the Constitution. This lesson is using a teaching strategy called simulation, or creating this fictional problematic scenario that requires students to apply multiple academic and social skills to create solutions to redress. So please experience this lesson as a student, but also consider how this lesson might play out in your classroom as we work through this lesson demonstration. Here we go.
So We Got Madison. We're creating a future scenario, which is a simulation. You're creating a fictitious scenario that you want people to enter into and then learn within that framework. For this particular scenario, it's the year 2040. And 4 youth are determined to end mass shootings. They built the time machine, traveled back to 1790 because James Madison introduced the Second Amendment in 1791. So they tried to get to him before he actually authored the Second Amendment. Their mission was to meet Madison, the author of the Second Amendment in the Bill of Rights. They tried to convince him to revise the Second Amendment before its ratification in 1791. Yet he refused, so they told him that they were from the future. Madison agreed to change the Second Amendment, but only if they can prove that time travel existed. So they took Madison back to 2040 to see the impact of the Second Amendment firsthand.
All right, so that's a setup. Like any good lesson unit, we have standards that we align the lesson to. In this instance, we have standards related to information awareness, use of quality sources, and comprehension skills. You can certainly make this interdisciplinary to spice it up a bit. And certainly if you wanted to adjust this for higher grade levels, you could modify these standards and just make adjustments in terms of the level of supports, scaffolds, content for students based on their developmental levels.
We do not recommend this lesson for kids under the 6th grade.
Yeah.
Learning objectives. Students will be able to discuss and debate a current social issue in a thoughtful, respectful manner with peers. Students will be able to make reasoned arguments supported by textual evidence. Students will be able to analyze the Second Amendment and revise elements of it to reduce gun violence.
Okay. And so if you would switch over to the lesson guide. So what we are about to engage in is this actual lesson demonstration. So if you could scroll up to the top, please. So what we have is the opportunity to delve into this lesson as we are actual students. And so what we'll do, we'll approach this in 2 different parts. So this initial time, you will be placed into, Big Marker has randomized groups. So you'll be placed into randomized groups. What we'd like for you to do for this first breakout session is simply to reread the prompt with your group. And then you'll see there's a 2-parter. So there's the initial prompt, and then underneath there is the youth conference. We'll read it together first, but then you'll have opportunity in your breakout room as well. And then we'll just be completing part 1 of this as though we were actual students to, again, simulate what that experience would be like if you were an actual student. Now that is small. So I was actually going to call on someone to read this prompt, but I don't know if you already dropped the link in the chat.
Yes, everyone should be able to go to the chat room. At the very top, you'll see something that's highlighted in blue. That is a Google Drive link to this page. So please go there and just open it up and follow along with us.
Okay. And that is pretty even small for me. Dr. James or Morgan, are you able to read that aloud?
I can.
Okay.
If I go to full screen, I think I can. Upon arriving back to 2040, our time travelers brought with them James Madison from 1791, who created the Second Amendment. They started the hashtag We Got Madison movement to help him understand the impact of the Second Amendment on their lives and on in other American communities. They were hopeful that they could convince him to revise the Second Amendment before its ratification in 1791. Madison was overwhelmed by the progress that the country had made, but was very concerned about gun violence and his role in shaping it. He met with the president, Congress, Supreme Court, NRA, Sandy Hook Promise, parents, families, and children impacted by mass shootings. His four companions helped Madison send his first tweet, which simply asked, "Help me to rewrite the Second Amendment." At We Got Madison virtual conference, the hashtag went viral overnight, and youth from around the country organized a virtual conference to find answers to gun violence. Madison attended and spoke to youth around the country and shared his plan to take the Second Amendment back to 1791 and introduce it. They decided to form working groups of 7 to 10 people from different parts of the country. Each were asked to do three things. First is part one. So you guys are going to do part one, and then we're going to end the breakout room so we can have a small discussion about part 1A and B. So part 1A, what you're going to be given, let me show you the data sheets here. You'll be given several data sheets. We want you all to look at those, notice what patterns you see, and jot down some of those patterns. You'll see here in the middle under figure 1, we provided a short interpretation just in case you all needed an orientation to the data. But all of these different charts refer to both international and US based, whether it's gun violence or things of that nature, mass shootings, things of that nature. And you'll notice they come from several different sources. So we want you all to answer the question, discuss the question, what patterns do you notice concerning gun violence in the US compared to other nations? Please refer to pages 3 through 5 of the handout. We also then want you to deal with the legal perspectives that the Supreme Court and other judges have used since 1791 to make decisions about court cases related to gun violence. Primarily, there are 2 points of views which are found on page 6. So page 6 goes through what's called the collective rights and individual rights theory. Collective rights primarily say that the Second Amendment does not provide us individuals the right to bear arms. It provides that to states and to the national government. Thus, we can limit individuals' right to possess firearms. The individual rights theory, of course, says the opposite. Individual citizens do have the right to bear arms, and legislators like the Congress, like state legislators, do not have the right to restrict individuals' rights to bear arms. The Supreme Court has used these two theories to amend the Second Amendment several times throughout American history. We provided 8 different examples for you below each of those boxes. So please read those and then think about, as an individual, which one do you think which one do you believe you will fall under? Or which theory do you think provides the best opportunity to promote gun safety? And which theory do you think you want to use today to rewrite the amendment? So here are your instructions. What we're going to do now is break you into breakout rooms. Please use the link. And within your breakout room, you'll see breakout room 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 within the Google Drive. Please select the appropriate Google Drive folder for your breakout room. So if you're in breakout room 1, select folder 1, breakout room 2, folder 2. Use that document to put your responses to and track your responses.
So the ask is not necessarily record, but the ask is to begin to engage in the lesson. If you need to reread the prompt up top, then great. But nonetheless, for you all as a collective, as your group, to read through the data, like take a moment to read through, to unpack as you're noticing trends, anything alarming, anything that stands out, to have discussion about that. And then once you've completed reading through those tables, to just simply talk about what are you noticing amongst those data tables. And then the second part of that is then, again, not necessarily coming to a group consensus about, as a group, we lean more towards the individualist or the collectivist approach, a mindset, but more so just thinking, maybe kind of having conversations about what each of those approaches entails, and just individually which one you personally feel like you lean more towards. We have about 15 minutes. We'll drop a broadcast, an announcement to let you know when you have about 5 minutes or so remaining, and then we'll have you come back. And we'd love for folks to share out some of your noticings, especially amongst the data.
So we're going to take a look at the data together real quick and just talk it through. If you hover over the picture, you'll see two black bars on your screen. If you click in the top right-hand corner, you'll see something that says full. That will allow you to see the picture in the full screen and make it clearer, somewhat clear. So page 3 is dealing with suicide. Page 3 is dealing with the number of handgun deaths in the U.S. in 2020. And it basically shows us that most gun deaths in America are not homicide, but they're suicides. I think many people don't realize that, but I think that's an interesting fact. The figure number 2 is for 2020, and this is dealing with the international comparison, according to the BBC, of the percent of a nation's homicides that are caused by guns. So this is humans killing humans, the percent of all of your homicide caused by guns. And what you see is, if you look at the UK, only 4% of homicides are caused by guns. Australia, 13% is caused by guns. And in Canada, 37%. In the US, close to 80% of all of our homicides are because of guns. So much of the death that we have in our country, what this chart is saying is it has guns as a contributing factor. Number 3, the top civilian. This provides us a look at the gun ownership rate, which is, if you have 100 citizens, how many of those 100 citizens will own firearms? And what this is showing us, in Iceland, for example, for every 100 citizens, there's only 31 guns. In Canada, for every 100 citizens, there's only 34.7 guns. In the US, for every 100 citizens, there's 120.5 firearms. Studies have shown that gun violence and mass shootings is directly related to the number of guns available in a society. Figure 4 is a really challenging one when you look at it carefully. What Al Jazeera did was, in America, we have several databases to track mass shootings. They all define mass shootings slightly differently, but and so that creates problems with us understanding how many mass shootings that we have. So one of the ones that they used here was the mass shooting tracker, which recorded the highest number of mass shootings, 268 in 2022. So this is only measuring from January 1st to May 30th. So it's 268 just in this short amount of time for this year. You'll notice that the entire month is displayed on a row. So the very top row in the chart is all the days of January, and then February, March, April, and May. The darker the color, the more mass shootings occurred on that day. So January 1st, 7 mass shootings occurred. And we know that on May 29th, another 7 occurred. I believe that was Uvalde was one of those. So what this is showing us is that mass shooting is something that goes on throughout the year in America, but it's hard to track because we have different ways of measuring mass shootings. Lastly, this is, again, those 5 different ways of measuring mass shootings. And this gives you an infographic of how mass shootings are recorded. They're recorded by 3 or more people who lost their lives. Some use 4 or more people. Some use 4 or more people killed or injured. Some use 4 or more people injured. That 4 could include the shooter. It varies by location. So some require public places. Some look at anywhere. And then they try to analyze the motive of the shooter. And the shooter has to be indiscriminate. And the others, they can have any motive. But then you see how many mass shootings occurred in 2021 in the United States. At the very high end, 118, at the very high end, 818, with 920 people who lost their lives. And at the very low end, I'm not certain how they came up with this number, but only 6 mass shootings with 43 people injured. All right. So that is a look at the data set. Any questions about the data? You can use the chat room as well.
But I have a comment, if that's okay. Can y'all?
Please, comments as well are welcomed.
Really, something that kind of it got me thinking about just the fact that there's so many different ways to define mass shootings, how that can be very politically contentious, just because depending on the news source, technically these are all data driven and research driven sources. So depending on who's reporting what the mass shootings are, it completely frames the issue differently, because someone's seeing that there's 6 mass shootings in a year, it doesn't seem like an issue, but then you see that 818 number and now it's something that people would have to be concerned about. So it made me start thinking about that, the type of information that people are getting about this, that affects how willing people are to actually pay attention to the issue.
Well said, Haley. So
thanks for naming that. And just think about this experience for your students, for your students to be able to arrive at these pretty complex understandings without it being told directly to them, but for them to unpack it and then what that kind of sparks in them.
And for example, that lesson just on interpreting charts could be an entire day. So let's say if you're in a high school statistics course, or let's say if you're in a social studies unit, or let's say if you're in a math class where they're doing measures of center and they're doing how to understand percentages, great lesson. But that's a day of lessons, right? And for teaching that, I typically do the who, what, when, where of data, right? So kids understand when they look at a chart, find who, what, when, where, and then that will help them interpret the data. So each of these parts of the lesson are actually 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. So we just giving it to you guys in pieces, though. Katie?
Yeah, thank you, Haley, for to just contribute that. Sorry.
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Myself. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I just had to mute myself. Yeah, I was just thinking too, I teach 8th grade math, but I think as well, when kids are given the data, we also open ourselves up for why did you choose those sources where you choose those. I totally agree with what that data says, and I think those are very, very good sources. But I can just hear parents who don't necessarily want data or acknowledge that data have a problem with that data being brought to their students, you know? But that's one of those things that I think that there is a workaround. If you do have people who already have preconceived idea of what they want the data to show, like you said, data can be used in a very disingenuous way, you know?
Yeah.
But just saying.
That's a great point. AIM is centered on intellectual freedoms, right? We want kids to have information awareness, right? And the thing is, it's not like they're not seeing this data. If these kids are middle school up, they've seen data like this. They've seen news stories. But one of the things that is important is to send communications home to your parents when you're doing a lesson like this, and let them know what's coming up, and even send home a discussion guide, right, to help parents speak with their children once their children come home. But the important thing, I think, is making sure you give students multiple data sources, right? And so with the sources we picked, we're picking sources that have very conservative estimates of gun violence. And we have some that's saying gun violence is completely out of control. So at the very least, they can't say, well, you're trying to push a particular agenda, because you're giving them multiple data sources, right? And then we are allowing the children to draw their own conclusions. But great issue, Katie. Any other comments or questions? So let's turn our attention to the court cases, if you will. And Morgan, please help us with this. She's a lawyer, and I like to watch lawyer shows and pretend like I'm a lawyer. What are some of the things that stood out to you when you read these court cases? Okie dokie. See, I gave adequate wait time. What I'm going to do, well, basically, like we don't want to spend any more time on this, because we're going to put you guys back into your breakout rooms. But as you begin to rewrite your Second Amendment, we want you guys to kind of keep in mind which perspective, individual or collective, you want to take. I am going to show you all the guide one more time. And again, you can put yourself in full screen, and you can sit a little bit easier. So for the upcoming part 2, you're going to be using this one form here called the Revising the Second Amendment Checklist. This is something like you can give out to your students, right, to kind of help structure their thinking and structure their learning. Here we present any number of the critical issues related to whether we limit or not limit each of these things, right? We can limit concealed carry or not limit it. We can conceal open carry, firearm registration, etc. In the middle are questions to help us understand what these issues are about, right? Waiting period. Should we have to wait when we apply to own a gun? Should there be a waiting period, a cooling off period, to ensure that an individual who's in mental distress can't buy a gun right away, right? We see that the Senate just approved a tentative framework for legislation on gun control. I don't really think it has much in it, but they've done it. And honestly, they picked some of these things here. So your task as a group is to pick only three of these that you feel will contribute to reducing gun violence in America. And I know people may want to pick more, but just for the sake of time, pick which ones just the three that you think will promote gun safety. And then in the far right column, just talk about how you plan on, if you plan on limiting that or making it more accessible. You'll have 10 minutes as a group. Each group will have to pick a leader to help just get you guys through this process. Now, I want to take a look at the number of people we have in a session so we can determine the number of breakouts that we need.
Wait, hold on. Did you discuss part 3 too? I didn't hear that. Because then when they go back, it'll be parts 2 and 3.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ferguson. So part 3 is the actual revision of the Second Amendment, which is actually found on page 1 in this pink column. And you have the original Second Amendment in blue. Your task is you only have 27 words because the original amendment is 27 words. You have 27 words to offer a revised Second Amendment. Now, your revised Second Amendment cannot eliminate the right to bear arms, right? Because that would make the assignment really easy. You have to maintain the right to bear arms, but provide an amendment that will promote public safety and reduce gun violence. That's the caveat. You can't get rid of it, but you do have to provide a Second Amendment that will help us create a safer society. Any questions before we go into breakout rooms?
I just add real quick too. So the 3 priorities that your group decides on collectively will be used to help inform the revised Second Amendment. So naturally, it might take some time to say, okay, I think the XYZ are important central issues, but that's worthwhile because then that will help provide some, hopefully, some ease in crafting that revised Second Amendment. What we'll do is we'll broadcast an announcement to let you know when about 15 minutes are up for the first part and to begin wrapping that up, just selecting those 3 priority areas. And then another broadcast another announcement to let you know about how much time you have remaining for that revised amendment. We certainly understand you provide students with much more time, but we're working with a different level of expertise. And nonetheless, even if you aren't able to finish, we hope that you do. Nonetheless, we'll just share out what we have there.
And we have we're going to have 3 breakout rooms, so 3 people per breakout rooms. And when you revise your Second Amendment, when you come back, we ask that you put your breakout room number and then your Second Amendment in the chat so we can all see it. Lastly, remember in breakout room 1, follow that same link and go to folder 1 and edit your Second Amendment in that actual document in folder 1. Same thing for breakout room 2, use folder 2, breakout room 3, use folder 3. All right, starting the breakout rooms now. All right, welcome back. We hope you had a productive dialogue within your breakout room. Now, we just want to have some conversations. And first, we want to unpack how you all arrived at your decisions and unpack your revised Second Amendment. And we want to then turn our attention to, how this framework might apply to your own classrooms. So can a member of the breakout room please read the Second Amendment that you guys revised?
for our group, we were breakout room number 4. I don't know if we were going in order.
Thank you. Just please.
But ours says to protect the right of people to bear state permissible firearms and promote the safety of all citizens. Gun ownership shall be assured to those who are 25 years of age and abide by background and training requirements.
That's not bad. Can you put that in the
That's
chat?
pretty awesome. Great job, group.
Can you put that in the chat, please?
Yes, I can.
That was really awesome.
All right, so let's dissect that some. Read it one more time.
Okay, I'm gonna post it in the chat and then I'll
Okay.
reread again. But to protect the right of people to bear state permissible firearms and promote the safety of all citizens, gun ownership shall be assured to those who are 25 years of age and abide by background and training requirements.
Good.
Thank
So
you.
let's have a conversation about how you guys arrived at this Second Amendment. So, what were the 3 critical issues you guys tried to address?
Our 3 were the firearm type, whether there's a waiting period or not, and then also age limit. And so for waiting period, we kind of extrapolated a little bit because we were like, well, background checks and training can be included in a waiting period. Like both can be included at the same time. But yeah, those were our 3 that we were narrowing things down to. And something we noticed, even though all of us agreed that like the collective theory was like a better approach to great job, Katie. Katie was in my group, but I saw that she said in the chat. But that the collective theory was like a better approach to actually making real changes with gun regulations and gun laws because of the way the last Supreme Court cases went. Like the most recent ones were more so based on the individual theory. We thought it was better to regulate the individual perspective of things rather than try and recreate totally a more collective approach to like gun ownership and gun violence. So yeah, or not gun violence, but yeah, gun ownership.
Good. And I guess when you guys talk about the type of firearm, that is part of the clause that says people to bear state permissible firearms.
Mm-hmm. And so we talked about not having assault rifles or guns that have multiple rounds in them. But yeah, but we were thinking that I guess all of the details of the amendment would be explained later since we only had the 27 words, but maybe could be put in other clauses like underneath it, actually explaining what the requirements were.
Yeah. Like, and other members of your group can chime in as well, but
Please do.
let's say if this was a classroom and your students had just finished offering this revised Second Amendment, how might that activity be extended with another type of assessment?
And see, I definitely want the other people in my group to answer this one because I'm actually not a teacher. So I'm getting my master's in education policy, but I would love for expert teachers to answer this.
What was that question again?
How might this assignment be extended if your students, if you did the project that we've done so far, and your students got to this point where they offered a Second Amendment revision, how might you follow that up with some other type of assessment?
Coming to mind is this week started off with a time travel scenario. We could maybe try to time travel 200 years into the future to see whether this amendment would cover or mitigate any future developments that we might be able to foresee. Like, maybe there's something other than guns. Like right now, this is all that we can think of. This is the stage that we're at. But we'll now cover other types of weapons that are also considered guns, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, that's an interesting activity. Like, if you're in, like, let's say if you're in an English class and you can have them write a creative essay on what America would look like 200 years from now, right? So they travel to the future 200 years, and then they write a creative essay on what's the future of guns and firearms in America, given this revised Second Amendment, right? It'd be interesting to see what they come up with.
Another extension I'm thinking of is maybe to look at UK and Canada and what does their legislation look like, and how closely then does our proposed amendment mirror or model theirs, and maybe, what sort of statistics might we expect to see, within the next few years.
Yeah, that's a good international comparative piece. I agree with that too. Any other possible extensions of this type of activity? Look, like I'm thinking, like if I'm a math teacher, for example, and I might do an extension of this particular activity, where I ask students to consider how might we measure that America has become a safer country, right? So I may present, because part of the early activity is we presented 5 different ways that the U.S. currently measures mass shootings in America, right? And given this revised Second Amendment, what would be the best way to measure that America is becoming safer? So, I may ask them to give me 5 data points, 5 types of data that may give us an indication that America is becoming a safer place, with a clear rationale of how that data set refers back to each component of this revised amendment. Let's move on to another slight discussion, and let's talk about where were we going with this? Let's talk about a couple of things. When you're doing equity pedagogy, part of your goal is to help your students make sense of the world that they live in. I think something else is trying to help kids understand that they can make a difference in their education, and them committing themselves to become an informed and educated individual is key to their ability to affect change in society. I remember one of my daughters in 7th grade, and after the Uvalde shooting, she did not want to go back to school. There was I think 3 days left in school. And, she just, and I had a conversation with her, several conversations. One of the conversations was the importance of her getting, staying in school and being motivated, because that would help her prepare herself to make a difference. And her generation can end what our generation could not resolve. And so equity pedagogy is really designed to help young people understand that this is their country, and the responsibility for what the country shall become will be passed over to them at some point in time. And it is important that they commit to the process of developing themselves so that they can take up the reins and help lead the country and hopefully resolve some issues that we could not figure out how to resolve ourselves. A couple other notes is the AIM framework is really built around these 5 intercultural skills. Dr. Ferguson reviewed these earlier today, but this particular lesson, what I would recommend, what we recommend, is if you try to build one of these lessons, don't try to use all 5 intercultural skills at one time. Pick in your first lesson, just pick one. Second lesson, pick 2, etc. So in this lesson, we really targeted social awareness. We wanted them to understand the impact that guns had on all of us, right? So we needed them to get a broad picture of what was happening in the country. And so the issue here is they need to understand in terms of social awareness that yes, we can have an individual right in this country, but those individual rights have to be weighted against the public good. We in the preamble, it talks about we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. God has endowed them with certain inalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In that order: life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Social awareness helps them to understand that your pursuit of happiness cannot compromise other Americans' lives. That's the intercultural competence that we're trying to build. That we're individual Americans, but we're part of a whole. And what I do as one individual, I can promote my liberty, but it cannot require the sacrificing of other Americans' lives because I want to express my liberty. Social change, right? By going through this process of understanding of how these amendments work and how they developed over time, they can actually then extend an activity where they can go and speak to their local congressperson. But in some states, that's presently illegal. So you have to check with your laws before you write that into your lesson plan. Like in Texas, I believe that the laws prohibit their ability to really engage with political figures around issues like this, which is un-American. That's the best way I can say it. But this particular lesson was really designed to help them understand they can make a difference. One, in order to make a difference, you have to be informed. You have to be informed of the different issues, the different ways that mass shooting affects us, how America compares to other countries internationally, etc. So Morgan, did I state that properly, that in Texas, House Bill 3 prohibits students' interaction with their elected officials around current and controversial issues?
Yeah, there are severe or there are extreme limitations on how students are able to engage both with classroom material and activities, or even working with an organization that is outside of the schools or clouding requirement. That's pretty common across these bills in many other states. It's this attack on project-based learning and engagement, which is particularly since that's kind of what these bills claim to be about for students, but they want to a very specific way, which is why today there's with the more particular for teachers and students.
We didn't capture much of what you said, but it sounded really important. It really did. It sounded really, really important. I believe what Morgan was speaking to is that House Bill 3 that's currently in Texas does indeed prohibit many of many of our young people from taking part in political activities. And it prohibits using assignments that are designed to get kids involved with political activities. Um, and so before you do these types of lessons, make sure you check with your principal, make sure you check with your local school board as well to make sure you can do it. Um, we'll wrap up with just a couple of notes here. Um, Teaching for equity really involves a process that we call the equity imagination. I spoke briefly about it in the keynote this morning, but the equity imagination involves three ways of thinking. These are not steps. These are kind of three ways of thinking. I use this process with my graduate students who come to the university. And I really want them to focus and leave the university as curriculum experts, people who are able to integrate multicultural, urban education, equity education into any lesson or unit or teacher professional development. We focus on three ideas. One, you have to be able to situate your lessons. That is, you have to be able to connect your lesson with the lives of students. We picked this lesson on the Second Amendment for obvious reasons, because people would come to this lesson with schema, that is, emotional and experiential memories. And schema is necessary to build new knowledge on top of. So when you're able to connect lessons with the lives of students, you're able to take advantage of the schema that they come into the classroom with. If you don't do that, you have to find out where every kid is at in terms of their life experiences, and then try to teach to each level and develop each of their levels, rather than understanding youth culture and then tying your lessons to issues that are affecting the lives and development of young people. That gives you this pedagogical advantage. So think of all the topics that we can possibly address. Some of these topics are regional. And when there's happenings in the local community, these are topics that can be addressed. If you live in the Southwest, for example, the Colorado River is drying up and it's affecting the economy, the agriculture, even recreational activities. And so a great opportunity for kids is to understand the impact of these drying up of fresh water sources in their communities. Another one, if you live in close to in Michigan, and we think of the quality of water in all of those communities that were affected by the lack of quality water, and how long it took the state and the government to actually intervene to make sure people had safe drinking water. Lead in buildings. There's all these different things. Another one that I know Morgan is intensely passionate about, so is Kelly and myself, is interrupting the school to prison pipeline, right? So situating your lessons within the content. For example, America is still struggling with prescription drugs and with vapes. Why are we teaching about it in schools, right? Why can't we find a unique way to help kids understand the effect these drugs are having on their bodies in our science courses? So situation of your lesson is absolutely important. That provides you with these great pedagogical advantages. Simulation is a mental process. It can also be done individually, but it can also be done in groups. So we used here a teaching technique called simulation. That's where you create a fictional situation and then ask people to respond to it. But simulation is also a mental process where you imagine your lesson ahead of time, and then you anticipate how kids might respond and react to different parts of your lesson, and then you fine tune your lesson before you teach it to maximize engagement. So that's simulation. And if you can simulate a lesson, if you can think through it ahead of time, you overcome your fears of instruction. This happened to me in my first year of teaching 20 years ago. I wanted to do discussions, never done a discussion, was afraid I'd lose my students if I did it. I was afraid no one would speak. And so I simulated the lesson, wrote 20 questions out, thought of all possible scenarios, walked into the class the next day. Discussion went great. And since then, I've learned to simulate everything. So I can now simulate a 16-week course. I can simulate a year-long professional development. Lastly, and then we're going to come back to some more First Amendments, if we have Second Amendments, if we have any more groups that develop them. And so synthesize is the last one, and that's all about creativity. Every profession are experts in a particular area. We're experts in teaching and learning. That is, we have to exercise our expertise in teaching and learning to create equity. Equity is actually impossible if we don't exercise collectively and individually our professional creativity. That is expressed in how we design lessons, how we prepare materials, how we interact with kids, etc. So creativity, absolutely critical in what we do. So it's important that we create. We don't give over our creative potential to anyone. When they were trying to find a cure to COVID, no one called educators because they own their creative expertise in medicine. We're one of the only groups of professionals that let other people design assessments, design standards, design lesson plans. And this is why teaching is being deprofessionalized. In other countries that outpace us, their professionals, their teachers own curriculum development. They own it, right? They own it. So if we want to be taken seriously as a profession, and if we want to advocate truly on behalf of our kids, no one else can tell us how to teach. No one else can tell us how to help promote learning. That is our profession. And as our kids are struggling in our society right now, it's important for us to really take ownership of our profession. To help with this, IDRA has developed something called the Education Resource Hub. It is it's online right now, but it's in its infancy phases. This lesson and many more lessons will appear there over time. It's going to take a couple months to populate all these new lessons, but these are just templates. Please, when these become available, the AIM framework will be available, and there's a lot more to the AIM framework that we could not get to today, but we'll try to make it available. And IDRA is curating like tons of equity resources for teachers. This is going to be a one-stop shop. So if you want to find a particular lesson on a particular issue, you'll see something there that you can pull from. For example, Dr. Ferguson and I are creating a lesson on racial slurs in classrooms and racial slurs in schools, because there is very little to no training to help teachers understand what to do when kids are using racial slurs in schools. We're creating one on helping kids to understand the race and gender income gap, right? So there's so many different opportunities that we have. Also, as a part of this convening, IDRA will be hosting roundtables, discussions with teachers. And these roundtables are designed to help teachers provide us with information on the type of resources they need help with. And from there, we'll be providing more of those resources based upon the feedback that teachers provide us. So we're looking at the chat, seeing if we have any additional questions. I do know that one person asked about, Becky asked if there were more Second Amendments. I don't think there were. At least we couldn't tell if there were, because it appeared that there were only one breakout room from what we can see online. But if there were more individual groups that created more Second Amendments, please post them in the chat. We have a little bit of time, we'll be able to discuss those. And if not, then we will conclude with a few questions and we will provide some responses. You may use the chat room or unmute your microphone to ask a question or to share any comments as well. And all comments are welcome. Hey, Morgan, you want to go over some of the policy efforts at IDRA and how teachers can support?
Yes, I'm going to turn off my camera while I do that.
Okay.
So that hopefully you all can hear. So I dropped a few links in the chat and you all will get these as participants in the convening. They are for our school resource hub, We All Belong, which Dr. James was just describing. We also have, it's an advocacy and resource site for folks across the South who are working on these issues in their communities. So it's a place for anyone to be able to kind of log in and pick up ideas about other advocacy strategies. So we really encourage you all to do that. And of course, on our both the EAC website and our IDRA.org website, there are materials that are policy explainers, an advocacy guide, which I'll drop in the chat in a second. But please feel free to, I'll put my email address in the chat. If you have questions or concerns in your community or state about how, about advocacy strategies or policy questions, I am so happy to either talk to you myself or connect you with the right person from our organization that works on those issues. But it's definitely, it's tough out there. Thank you for that comment, Katie. But it's also super inspiring for us to come together like this in the larger convening and in this particular group to talk about concrete ways that we can actually tackle what's going on in the policy space and support students and teachers in schools.
Hey, thanks, Morgan. Do yourself a favor and visit IDRA's website. They do a lot of really great work, and in these days and times, there's no space for neutrality. So everyone of goodwill, we need to find a way to engage with the change-making process and find where you feel comfortable and engage. For some, that's going back to graduate school and getting better prepared. For others, that's taking an internship at IDRA or something of that nature. For others, it's joining working groups to advocate with local teachers. For others, we may have a platform. I think we're working on that with IDRA called Teaching for Teachers, and that's teachers actually developing these types of lessons and then submitting those to the website so that other teachers may have also access to those lessons as well. So there's any number of resources that will be turning out over this summer that teachers can use for their classrooms. Dr. Ferguson, want to offer last words?
Truly we thank each of you for being here, being present, contributing your ideas to this conversation. We look forward to producing more supports, resources that will be of value to you and your work. So just a huge thank you for everything today. And we hope that you will find great worth, value in the resources to come to support your work. Hope you have a fantastic remainder of your day and a great rest of this conference week. And Dr. James dropped the contact info, email address if you'd like to inquire further. But thank you all. Take care and have a wonderful summer.
Yes, indeed. Y'all take care.
Bye-bye.